Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and we're joined by Jess again to chat all about the world of niches or niches. We were just talking about this off the air. And which one did we agree on?
Niche.
Niche.
Definitely niche.
Yeah. It's probably because we're Canadian. I feel like we kind of have it's kind of got to be a French word, right? There's the niche at the end that feels French to
Niche.
me.
D.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, we're talking about differentiation in many ways as well as niches, and this is an interesting topic, and it's one that I find to be kind of challenging as a real estate agent when you're in this space, because you look at your client base and you're like, wow, like I have first time home buyers, I have potentially a luxury buyer, I have an investment buyer, and then you start to think to yourself, does it make sense for me to actually niche down, or should I just remain relatively general? And it's a conversation that either agents will have with one another or they'll have with their own minds. And partially, I think sometimes we kind of feel like we should be niching down, but then other times we're like, well, but we don't want to alienate other people. So first off, what comes to mind for you when you think about should an agent niche down or not?
I think it's market specific. So I guess I'll speak to my market, which is Toronto or any sort of big market. I think it might be different if you're in a certain, maybe a smaller town or whatnot, and the population pool is just smaller. Maybe it's different, but let's assume you're in like a big urban center. I was wrong. I think you should niche down. My whole career, I was convinced that, I could be this great generalist and, I go where my clients need me. And I was great at that. I became very adept at very quickly learning a neighborhood if I didn't know it yet, and putting in the work to be an expert if it was a type of property I hadn't dealt with before. But I think just with the way the world is going and how much more information is out there and how many more agents there are, I was wrong. You should niche down. So if you haven't thought about it yet as a real estate agent, start thinking today.
Interesting. So what makes you think that niching down is a lot better than staying general?
Well, I think it's just hard. You're making your life harder, right? Like if every single new client that you get comes from a different neighborhood or is a different type of buyer, and you're constantly sort of switching gears, it's a lot of context changing, isn't it? It's like, okay, first you have to be an expert in this, then you have to be an expert in that. And it's probably easier if you just pick a niche, try and stay in your lane, and become a true expert at it. That's not to say that you can't then take on clients that are outside of it. But if your passion lies with a particular niche, then maybe you lean into that and accept it, right? Rather than trying to be everybody's expert.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much you're saying here that's so important. But one comment that you made is this concept of passion. And this is one that kind of has me thinking through the niche. Do you feel like the niche that an agent selects should be passion driven or market driven, in the sense like I see an opportunity in this particular niche? Should it be a combination? How do you think through that?
I think it could be either. Like if you know yourself and you know that you are, highly driven when it comes to numbers, you're a real estate investor yourself, you love forecasting what returns might be on certain investments or what neighborhoods are doing in terms of gaining value, like maybe then you love working with investors, or maybe you're someone who really likes helping families find their forever home. But I think it kind of depends on you, your strengths, your personalities, and then the market that you're in. Like maybe your market doesn't have tons of options. You can't niche down as specifically as some other places.
That's a good point. I like how there's a combination here, but I'm totally with you. I think you kind of need to look at both of these things together. I would almost say that the most valuable one to select, if you had to choose, whether it be like market specific, and I see that there's an opportunity here, and I'm passionate about this other thing. So let's just say that I see a lot of opportunities with investors, but I'm super passionate about condo properties. I just love condos, but I understand that there's not anybody who's really crushing it when it comes to investors. I would almost always go towards the condos, like go towards the passion, because it's almost like anything in life. If we're not interested in it and not passionate about it, it's amazing what you can learn when you are passionate about something, and how deep you can go when you're really curious and really interested in how to service that market. When you're really curious about condos and the different buildings and the different amenities, it doesn't really feel like work as much. And even though you have the opportunity potentially with investors, but you look at an Excel spreadsheet and want to pull your hair out, or just don't have an interest in that side of the business, although there's an opportunity, if you're not passionate about it, I don't think you're going to be overly good at that particular niche.
That's a good point. Did you niche down?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes and no. I'm hesitating right now because I did everything you shouldn't do, I guess. And we can talk about different niches out there too, but one of the main ones that I think a lot of agents that comes to mind for them is geofarming, right? Geofarming is like the classic niche in real estate. And I made like the biggest mistake you can in geofarming, and I did it 3 times. So it's not like I learned my lesson overly quickly. And that was selecting a geofarm, doing it for 3 months, and then saying, I'm not getting anything, I'm gone. And then I did that again. And actually, this other niche that I had was in a community, and I was door knocking the community and handing out flyers. And somebody called the cops on me. So then the cops showed up. Yeah, they thought I was like trying to break into homes because I was door knocking, and I was leaving a flyer. And then the cops like pulled up, lights on, sirens, everything. And I was wearing like this hat, so I probably looked like I was kind of sketchy or something. I guess I already looked sketchy enough already. But the cop came out, and he's like, we've received calls that you're trying to break into homes. And I was like, no, I'm just a realtor. I'm trying to like build my business. And then I actually had a really good conversation with the cop, and he's like, hey, how's the market going? And things like that. It ended up being a really funny conversation. But that like traumatized me because I was relatively new, and I'm like, well, screw this. This is not going to work for me. So then I dropped that geo farm as well. And then actually later, it took a number of years, and then found a geo farm that I quite like working in. I started to do it, and I said, I'm going to do this for a year. Like, I'm going to do this without a doubt for a year. And if it doesn't work after a year, and let's say it costs like 10 to 12K in order to do this, I said, that's a learning opportunity. That's what I'm going to do. And then interestingly enough, after doing it for a year, it took like about 8 months to get the first sale, but then it was like, boom, 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 another one, until we were able to reach the highest producing agents in that community. But it took a number of times to learn that lesson.
So sounds like the magic number is for you is like at least 6 to 8 months before you're going to see some traction. Is that what you would recommend that agents keep their eye on?
I think it's 12 months. I don't think you can, there's certain marketing campaigns that I think you can test for 6 to 8 months, but I think geofarming is one that definitely requires 12 months. But there's an interesting concept. When I was starting to think through geofarming, I looked at specifically the top agents in my market, solo agents, not teams. So top solo agents. And I'd say to everybody to think through this. If you're in a larger city, think through the very top agents in your city and ask yourself, do they own a given market? Do they own a geofarm? And almost across the board, the answer is yes. There's the odd case where that's not but they do own something, which might be a product type like luxury or condos. But almost always, an agent is going to own some area if they reach the very, very high producer level. So I was like, well, there's got to be something to this. But I think you also brought up such an important point, which is with more agents coming into the market. And I mean, they've been saying this for like 15 years. So it's not like this is anything new, but does create this world where we need to start thinking about hyperlocal. Like hyperlocal real estate. And my city's one of like 1.3 million. It's big, but it's not massive by any means. But there's certain areas that I can't service because I just don't know that market. And Toronto's probably similar.
Yeah, it's getting that way for sure. And I mean, you can, like I used to do a lot of condos and I knew every single condo building in the downtown. But I haven't been as active in the last few years as I've been working on other projects for project companies. And there's a lot of new buildings I haven't been in yet, right? Because things are building up so quickly here. So that's what I tell new agents too. Whenever I'm training or coaching new agents, like my first question is like, where do you live? And does everybody in your building know that you're an owner here or a renter here? It doesn't matter. And like, start there, like specialize where you live and work your way out. If you spend a lot of time in that neighborhood, it's just easy, right? It's the places you go every day. It's the people you see every day. Start there.
Totally. I totally agree. I think the area where you live, there is, if you wanted to get like super advanced with it, there's this concept where if you're geofarming and you geofarm downtown, it can be very, very lucrative. And if you geofarm on the outskirts, it can be very, very lucrative. But then there's like this middle ground that are homes that aren't like downtown. Depending on the size of your city, you might be like 10 to 20 minutes from downtown. And an interesting concept occurs where people will leave the downtown core and go to the suburbs. And so there's a real opportunity in the downtown core because they're going out to the suburbs. But when they get out to the suburbs, a lot of times there's new construction going on out there. So sometimes they're not using an agent to get into those suburb communities because they're buying directly from the builder. And then so they don't have an agent. So that's why these suburbs, if they sell in the suburbs and they want to get closer to downtown, the suburbs can be super valuable. And then also the downtown. But then there's kind of this in-between middle zone. That's not to say it's not effective, but there is a lot of power, I think, in thinking through the dynamics of where people are moving and if they have an agent.
Yeah. Great point. So like
Yeah.
location is one way to niche down. If you're
Mhm.
passionate about certain neighborhoods or you see an opportunity or an in somewhere, or maybe you see a few signs in your neighborhood that keep coming up on listings, but you think that you could break into it,
Yeah.
do it. That's a great way. Location. Are there any other niches that you've worked over the years?
Yeah, well, there are. I went down the road of the investment niche and then quickly pivoted out of it. Not because I don't like it. Like I did find it pretty interesting. I thought there was value there. But what I found when I was dealing with investors is sometimes the loyalty isn't there. Like they're just going to go to wherever somebody is, who the quickest person that can get them into something. And they also tend to look at a lot of places without actually making decisions, which is totally fine. I mean, that's how they're going to go about finding the right property. But I found it to be very time consuming, less loyalty. And so I pivoted out of that one pretty quickly. But what about you? Outside of location, what are some other niches that have interested you?
I think if I was to go back into real estate sales like full time, I would probably lean into something that I enjoyed most when I was selling a lot. And that was working with women, especially as first time buyers, but just young women in general. There was this huge sense of satisfaction that I would get from helping a woman establish basically her future, right? Like to me, investing in real estate is a way to financial freedom. And I think a lot of women are not necessarily raised to invest on their own. It's like you buy a house with your partner and that's what you do. And of course, the costs now are so high that it's not always possible. But if you do have the means or you're able to work towards purchasing a property, it was just so fantastic for me to be a part of that. And I would advocate for all my friends. I was always pushing all my friends, buy something. Even if you can't live in it because maybe it's too small, it's not where you want to live, buy something small as an investment condo, rent it out. You have some equity growing, you have your foot in the market. That could help propel you up to this house that you hope to buy with your, future husband or what have you in 5-10 years. But put yourself into the market. And I think a lot of women are scared to do that. Not generally, but I have seen it. And being able to help women create this future was so satisfying to me.
That's so cool. I love that. And then so walk me through some of the differences that you notice. I think you've already touched on them slightly here, but like what's the difference between, let's say that you have a single female looking to purchase versus a single male? Like what are some of the differences that you notice that really caused you, I know just the passion towards helping them, but is there some different ways that you went about the transaction when it was a female versus a male?
Good question. Well, I think women might have different parameters sometimes that would be more important to them. Like perhaps like the safety of the neighborhood would be paramount, or proximity to friends or family or workplaces. So outside of that, I think there wasn't necessarily like a difference in terms of men and women. Mm-hmm. But I just love the idea of getting more women into real estate investing, right? Like just get in there.
Because you started quite early too, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. I got very interested in real estate investments in university, I would say. I moved to Toronto from Victoria, BC. And when I was in university, which was in downtown Toronto, I would kind of like wander through the city and I'd always come across these condo buildings and I would call my dad and I would say, Dad, like, I don't have the money, but you should invest in some of these. Like Toronto's growing. I could just tell that it was going to be a good opportunity. And I would spend a lot of time with the real estate agents at these sales sites learning. And so that kind of piqued my interest in investing in real estate. And I bought my first place when I was 25. It was on my 25th birthday. Was I 25 or was I 24? Okay, 24 or 25. And it was a multiple offer. And I ended up winning it on my birthday. I was celebrating my birthday with my now husband, Andrew, at a restaurant called Canoe, which people in Toronto will know is like in the skyscraper. It's beautiful. And I was up against a whole bunch of other people and we spent the dinner involved in this multiple offer and I won. And it was the best feeling to know that I finally had a place of my own. It was scary, of course, but I was always confident that I could manage it.
That's amazing. And so was this one for you to live in or was it an investment?
This was for me to live in.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's fantastic, especially the exhilarating feeling. You know what's kind of interesting about that is like as agents, we go through this all the time. Like we're helping a client through a multiple offer situation. But when you reflect back and you're like, I remember that feeling, the back and forth, probably like waiting, looking at your phone, wondering if you're going to get it. There's a lot of value in us going through this process ourselves like this. So we understand what's going through our clients' minds as well.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I almost think it should be a prerequisite for a real estate agent to at least like buy or sell something something every 5 years or so to just put themselves back in the driver's seat as a buyer or a seller and just experience those emotions. Because as much as you try to distance yourself from it as the professional, like when you're in the situation, it's just human emotion.
It is. And it's funny how we don't think it's going to impact us, but it actually, but it does. So coming back to this niche of serving women, how would you suggest if somebody's listening to this and says, wow, that sounds really cool, I'm passionate about that as well, how do they go about attracting, whether it be a gender or a personality or something like that? How are they attracting these people from a lead generation standpoint?
Well, I think once you've established what you really enjoy, you probably have worked with a client, and so you enjoyed that experience and you want to sort of double down on that. It's as simple as asking for a referral. Like, hey, Ms. Client, you're exactly the type of person that I would like to work with in the future. Do you have any friends or family looking to buy real estate? Period. Yeah. Actually, question mark. Like, send it, right? And keep asking, because first of all, it's complimentary of your client. You're telling them how much you enjoyed working with them. They're the exact kind of person that you want to work with. Who doesn't want to hear that? And chances are, like, they do have like-minded friends. So I think word of mouth and referrals, if you're going to niche down, let's say into a particular age group or what have you, like for me, it was women, that's probably where I would start. And then now, like, the advantages on social media are huge. Like, start talking about it, be passionate about it, send value. Like, how can you provide value to this group of people that you want to work with? And then you can form a little community around it and be the go-to expert.
And agents that do this, they tend to see more production, which I want to just quickly ask you about, and then we're going to get into a few different niches, and we're gonna distill them. We're going to look at them and say, hey, is this a good niche or bad niche? Which there really aren't any good or bad ones, but we are going to look at pros and cons. But with this concept particularly, when we're thinking about niching down, and if you were saying, okay, I'm going to help women, isn't there a concern at the back of your mind that, okay, well, this is going to alienate from any man who wants to buy and sell real estate? So how do you kind of coach an agent through this concept of, by niching down, I'm going to have fewer opportunities because my target client base is smaller?
I guess I would just flip that question around and ask, would you rather do more deals with that certain persona or that certain group that you really enjoy working with? And if you could spend all of your time working with that group that you're passionate about, would you be happier as a real estate professional? And if you would, then maybe you double down. And that's not to say that you don't take any other groups of people or any other clients. Of course you can. I think when you're seen as an expert in a certain field, you'll still attract other clients. And maybe you can do 70% of the deals with the group that you're targeting. And maybe 30% is still like referrals from other people. That's not going to stop. Mm-hmm. As a real estate agent, even though I had sold hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate, I'd still have clients saying, oh, can you help my niece? She needs to find a rental for $1,000. If I had time, I would still do it, even though that wasn't my bread and butter. But I don't think you have to say no to other clients to say yes more often to the ones that you really enjoy working with.
Totally agree. I totally agree with that. And one thing that I tend to find with these is, once you niche down, a lot of times people think, okay, the pie's getting smaller. I have fewer opportunities because I have a smaller target audience, whether that be a Geo-Farm or whether that be a personality type or something like that. But in fact, when you take a step back, you are going to be putting opportunities on your plate that you wouldn't have had previously. I think everyone can agree with that. If I'm going to focus on a Geo-Farm, more opportunities in that Geo-Farm are going to come up for me than if I did do nothing in that Geo-Farm. So oftentimes we think to ourselves, okay, well, we're going to lose everybody else, but that's not the case. For every maybe one person you lose because they're on the opposite side of town and they say, okay, well, you're really focusing on the north end of town and we're on the south side. So let's say for every one person you lose, you'll tend to gain 5 more. So like, your pie is getting bigger. It's not getting smaller. You're just putting more opportunities on your plate that you wouldn't have had previously. And for every one you lose, you probably get 5 more opportunities. So if you think about that, okay, maybe I don't want those 5 new opportunities. I'll just take that one. Would I rather 1 deal or would I rather 5 deals? Well, I'd rather 5 deals. So we have to start to think about this as, by niching down, you're actually opening up more opportunities, which seems counterintuitive, but it's actually, when you think through it, it's not. You're putting more opportunities on your plate that you wouldn't have had previously. And for every one person you alienate, you get 5 more. So in just from pure math sense, it makes a lot more sense usually.
Absolutely. It also is probably less work in a lot of instances, right? Like, there's this agent in my neighborhood where I live in the beaches, and she absolutely dominates this one particular sort of area of new construction homes that were done about 20 years ago. Every other like 90% of the signs in that complex are her. And once you get to know a building or an area or a location that well, you don't have to context switch as much to like get the listing ready or to become an expert on what's sold, because you just did the other 5 sales. So it's actually creating, I would say, opportunities for you to do less work.
Yeah, totally. Not to mention drive time. Like in your city, one end to the next, you're looking at what, like an hour and a half usually. And it's so honestly, I got to say, when I'm helping somebody and I don't know the area, even though I'll try and I'm going to learn everything I possibly can, there's something kind of deep down inside of me that says, look, you're going to provide them with really good service. I know that. But at the same time, I don't know this community as well. And somebody says, well, what about this street versus that street? What are the people like? I can't fully answer that. And I think consumers are starting to want that because there are so many agents out there. There always have been. But even as we start to continue to think about that concept, there's going to be more and more people that want hyper specific or hyper local service. And I honestly think real estate's moving in that direction very, very quickly. This generalized real estate agent, it may start to fall by the wayside as we get more and more agents that come into the industry. Your hyper local agent and your hyper specific agent, those are the ones that I think are really going to take off in the next 5 years.
I would agree. There's a lot more free information out there for consumers now. So you providing that nuance, that nitty gritty detail that you know from working that area is going to make a difference in a lot of clients' minds when choosing somebody.
Totally agree. So let's look at a few different niches here. So just in case agents are listening to this and they're saying, okay, this is all great, but like what can I actually niche down on? And I think that there's a whole bunch of different things. We've already talked about geo-farming a fair bit, which tends to be kind of the main one. Well, what are some other types of niches that we can explore?
I think a big one a lot of people will be asking about or wanting to break into is the luxury market.
Yes.
Quote unquote, which luxury means a lot of different things at a lot of different price points depending on your city. But whatever luxury market is in your area, a lot of people think, oh, well, if I only had to sell like one house a year and make the same money, like, why wouldn't I do that?
Totally.
So what do you think about luxury?
Well, yeah. So I kind of think of this as like product type. So you could have luxury, you could have condos, different types of products, right? Mm-hmm. You could have like the bungalow realtor. Luxury is a really interesting one. And when we're thinking through it, I think there is kind of just the sexy element of selling the, $5 million home. And honestly, like that does sound like a fair amount of fun, and your commission is going to be higher based on that price point. So there's a lot that actually makes you think that this is probably worth doing. But it's not just the sale of the home. There's a few things with luxury. First off, you have to be able to attract luxury clients.
Yes.
So you can't just break into luxury without thinking, how do I get in front of luxury clients? You can't just start doing mailers to a luxury community. You might get the odd one, but chances are you're not going to get too much. These people are going to be using people within their network. And so you need to be able to find opportunities to basically be around these people. Now, when you're going to be around these people, what does that mean? That means you're going to have to be in their network. And how do you get into their network? Typically, you have to spend a fair amount of money. Like you have to join clubs that are going to cost you like $40K a year sort of thing to be part of these clubs. You're going to have to find your way into it. And then on top of that, your marketing to them is going to have to be more expensive as well. So your barrier to entry to get into that market, I see as very high. And I just would caution agents not to get caught up by the allure of selling luxury, because also your days on market oftentimes is going to be significantly higher. You could be trying to sell a home for 3 or 4 years, and then you also have to maintain that listing. So it's not just getting the listing. If it's going to take a year to sell that listing, you're now going to have to be able to provide very high level of service and probably costing you a few $1,000s every month in marketing in order to maintain that listing. And hey, it may not sell and they may go to another agent. So you just have to you have to be prepared for that risk. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you have to basically join the group you're trying to sell to. And in the luxury market, that can be really expensive. So if you're a new agent and you're from family money and you have tons of connections, you should definitely utilize those.
Definitely.
If you're
totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, great, use them 100%. Let's say you've just moved to a new city and you don't really know anybody. It's going to take you time and money and effort to break into that market. So you'll have to weigh the pros and cons of that.
You will. And I think agents should do that instead of just being like, oh, I love this concept of selling $5 to $30 million homes. like, sure, that sounds great. We watch $1 Million Listing. We see the little commission number at the bottom and we get all excited. We think, oh, why aren't we just doing that? We have to really think it's not just getting the listing and selling the listing. It's getting the client. And so if we're going to get the client in the luxury market, and I know in my market and in most markets, there's particular agents that just do luxury, and that's because they've found their way into that market. And it's actually pretty rare, I find, that a luxury listing, it does come up from somebody who's not actually a luxury agent. But in order to get into that market, you have to be able to spend both time and money to break into that market. And it's going to take both. Like, it's not going to happen in 1 year. You're probably going to, in order to break into that market, you're probably looking at 3 years plus, I would say. And you just have to be prepared for what you're going to have to put in for time and money.
Yeah, I think when you're a listing agent, 90% of it is securing the listing, right? So how can you win that client over? And as you've mentioned, takes a long time in luxury.
Let's look at a few other ones. So one that I do actually really like when it comes to property types, I've already brought it up a couple of times, but is this concept of condos. And regardless of where you are, it could be a gated community, it could be condo, it could be called strata. Generally speaking, when we're thinking about this product type, it is quite a bit different than other sales in most markets when you're selling condos. And I think that there are some hurdles to it, but it's also a market that one can break into as a relatively new agent, especially when they focus on, like you're saying, focus on a building, focus on 2 buildings, focus on a block where there's like 4 or 5 buildings. Just focus on a small segment of that. And then you start to branch out and become the condo agent. And agents that I know who have focused on this, it's remarkable how many opportunities can land on their plate. And that's all they do. Yes, I do see them listing and selling other properties that aren't condos. Maybe they're selling a condo and they're buying into another home. So they're still getting 2 sides of the transaction. But again, the number of opportunities they're getting. And I know you and your husband, you guys have focused a fair amount on that.
Yeah, we did. I mean, in Toronto or any huge urban centers, it's probably, as you advise, like best to pick a few buildings rather than just specialize in condos, because there's just, hundreds and hundreds of buildings in cities. But yeah, we both worked for a pretty prominent builder and real estate broker who did focus on condos. So that kind of niched for us in a lot of ways, to the point that sometimes people would ask at the beginning of my career, like, oh, I didn't know you did houses. And that was because all of the marketing was pretty strictly focused on condos. So yeah, I think you have to be cognizant of that, and choose accordingly. For me, it was perfect. I lived downtown. I loved condo living. I worked a lot of pre-construction builds, so I understood actually what it took to build a building and what the process was like and what the sales process looked like. And so for me, it was easy. But if you're somebody who has never lived in a condo or doesn't particularly like condo living, well, maybe don't choose
Don't
that.
do it. Yeah, exactly. There's one in our market, which I'm sure there's a number of these in various markets out there. And these 2 teams actually just started to own this particular niche that I'll explain. And they literally, over the course of, I would say, 1 to 2 years, they probably went from doing anywhere from, call it 2 to 300K in GCI to like well over 2 million. And this niche that they focused on was infills. So basically they knock down the old home and they build 2 semi-detached or duplexes, depending on where we are, brand new, almost luxury feeling homes. And they branded themselves as infill real estate agents, and they have names that very much speak to that market. And it was wild to watch these 2 groups of agents just start to own that market. And it's unbelievable. They got like every single builder. They got so much resale from this particular type of property, which is basically knocking down an old home and building a new one on that. So this is how these niches can form, and like their business just skyrocketed in a very short period of time. So thinking through, it's not just like condos or luxury, like you can get pretty niche with what you're doing and see a massive, massive amount of growth.
And from there, like my mind immediately goes, oh, great. Then they can start developing these infill properties themselves.
They do.
That's what I would do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. Now then they start to build them as well. And they get so many builder clients because of this in new construction, because that's how they've branded themselves. And I was so impressed with that. And there's all sorts of different property types, right? There's townhomes, there's homes with basement suites in our city in particular. There's all sorts of different ways that we can go in this direction when it comes to product type. The other one though that I think that you already mentioned is new construction.
Yes.
And I think that is an area that a lot of agents want to break into. And because you did, I know that was also offered by way of your brokerage, but what sort of tips or suggestions would you have to somebody who says, that's the niche that I want to focus on, new construction.
Yeah, it can be very lucrative because a lot of builders will offer pretty crazy incentives. Like there's some right now. My husband's going to a sales site today. They're offering 10% if you do 3 or more deals. 10%. Well,
10%.
pre-construction, yeah. The pre-construction market right now is tricky in Toronto because the price per square foot is so much higher than the resale product that's available today. And so there are challenges with it for sure. That being one of them, it's harder to sell. Second challenge being you don't get paid necessarily right away or at all. My husband's had it happen to him multiple times where he's worked on a sales site for well over a year and the building didn't get built. So he lost a lot of money. And it's happened more than one time. So usually, at least in Toronto, you get paid a portion of your commission when it's firm, a portion when construction starts, and then you get paid out at the end as well. Or there's slightly different cadences, but so you don't get all your money quickly if that's important to you. But there are a lot of pros to it. You can really sort of niche down on, let's say if you're from a certain community and you have a lot of family and friends who are interested in investing in condos, like you could probably get a bit of a pool going together where you could get people to invest in buildings with you and they come to trust your judgment when it comes to what's going to provide the best return. So that could be a great opportunity. As well, if you just like the concept of buying into the future, like it's exciting, right? It's glitzy showrooms and the buildings are beautiful. You get to pick your own finishes. You know, I would love doing that for clients where I'd actually go in, pick their finishes for them, or at least help them design it. You know, if you're someone who really enjoys the construction process, doing what we call in Toronto a PDI or a pre-delivery inspection for your clients, going through, finding all the problems, getting them fixed from the builder, like it's fun to be part of that.
So thank goodness for people like you, Jess, because all of those things sound amazing to you and they sound awful to me, which is exactly why we can think through niching. Like selections with a buyer to me just makes me go nuts. And that's just because and my wife makes fun of me all the time. She's like, Mike, as long as you have like a roof over your head, you don't really care. Like I don't really care about my cabinet colors. I don't really care about the paint on I don't really care about my flooring in the house. There's so much that I don't care about. So it makes it harder for me. And oftentimes if we have somebody doing new construction, she'll take them because she wants to walk them through all the design elements and she wants to do the pre-possession walkthrough with them and find deficiencies. And I'm just like, there's a few deficiencies, but whatever, I'll live here. It's not a problem. And so this is, I think what we're touching on here is the fact that there's so many areas that we can go and we may not even know what our niche is. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't really know what my niche is, just try different things. Just go and explore and get curious about real estate in general. And from there, you may be pretty interested about where that takes you and give yourself 6 months to a year to just like explore different types of real estate. And then from there, determine. You don't have to like flip a switch and just determine what it's going to be today. Just explore these different things. I wouldn't have known I didn't like design until I went through the actual process of helping a buyer buy new construction. And they were picking like paint colors and different colors of taps and hardware. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot handle this. Like I'm just a pylon. I'm so useless because I have no context. I'm like, whatever's cheapest, let's do that one. But that's not the way most buyers work.
It depends what you're buying for, right? Like there's always certain colors and palettes I would lead investors to if they're going to rent it out for both wear and tear, for appealing to the widest net of tenants, all those things. So like there is like nuance that comes into choosing finishes. But yeah, if you're not someone who's jazzed up about the idea.
Yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't have known that, I think, unless I went through the process and actually started to explore it. And maybe you wouldn't have either, but you have a knack for it. And your mind is going to all these things where you can help people. And mind is like, how do I get out of the sales center as fast as possible? So anyways, I think it touches on that. Another niche that I'd love to ask you about is this concept of there's two other niches I think that we should quickly discuss. One is service-based and one is people-based. And what I mean by people-based is sometimes, and I'll give an example of one in my market, there's this gentleman, he's been in the market, he's been in real estate for a number of years, but he helps people, specifically people who have very nice cars. So he's been in our market for I think he's probably been 15, 20 years or something like that. And he goes to all of these car shows and loves cars. He's got a really beautiful car himself. Actually, I think he's got a few. And he helps people with like luxury cars, which if you think about it, if you're able to afford a $200,000 car or more, you're probably going to have a pretty nice house. And he's probably in the top 0.5% for our market as far as number of transactions is concerned. And in chatting with him, a lot of his business, he says, just comes from cars.
Wow.
Yeah.
passionate about them.
Yeah, so I think sometimes it doesn't even necessarily need to be real estate centric. It can also just be an interest that we have, and we're going to focus on that particular personality type with that interest. Now, I do think you want to be a little strategic when you go down this road, right? Because there might be certain groups of people that may not be looking to buy and sell real estate as much, right? Like if it's somebody, I don't know, I'm just pulling this out, but somebody who's like travels a lot or something like that. That's probably not a good example, but what I'm trying to get at is they're less focused on their community and more focused on elsewhere. So we want to kind of think through potentially those personality types. But I think you can really niche down and actually, there's another guy in our market. He just does endurance athletes. So marathon runners and Ironman, and like anytime I show his listing, there's like a bike in there and there's always a gym and all sorts of things, because this is what he does. He loves endurance, and he literally owns that market, endurance-based like athletes and weekend warriors. And it's amazing how much business you can do by just niching down on a particular interest.
Yeah, because you automatically have something in common with that consumer that can help turn them into a client. Yeah, we have some interesting ones here in Toronto. Like there's some agents who, for example, like only work with athletes, like professional athletes, because we have, a couple teams here. Or there's one gentleman who calls himself I think he calls himself the realtor on wheels or something. He bikes everywhere. He's really into biking and lifestyle, so he doesn't have a car. So that's kind of cute and interesting. There's so many ways to sort of combine interests and find like-minded people that you would want to work with.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that. I love that one. The realtor on wheels. There's another one in our market. He's very focused on tattoos. So he's like the tattooed realtor, and he's always like showing all of his big sleeves and stuff like that. And, you go and show any of his listings, and you can tell like there's people that are very involved with that community. So I think that there's no real limit to this. But one more that I think that we should discuss is this concept of service-based niches. And this one's a little bit different in ways, because sometimes it requires your office or your brokerage to be offering a more unique service base. But one in particular that all of us are going to know about is a discount brokerage that's offering to list your home for less money is a niche. Like that is in itself a niche, and in many ways a service-based niche. And you also have like the niches where your fees are actually higher than market in many ways, because you offer so much, and you're doing staging and you're doing all sorts of things. So I think that that's another area that we can lean into.
I also think like life stages and providing a service for different life stages is a good one too, right? Like leaning into, for example, baby boomers downsizing, or older folks needing to sell their home because they're moving to, let's say, a facility or whatnot. They've been in the home for 30 years. Like it takes a considerable skill set to manage like a different phase in somebody's life. And if you can sort of niche down and become known as that expert that, say, helps people like move up from their first to second home or downsize at the end of their lives, like that is also an interesting place to niche.
Yeah. That is. There's actually a gentleman in our coaching group right now. He very much focuses on move up buyers. And if you look at his Instagram and you look at his videos, he's always speaking to these move up buyers. You're looking to sell something, get more space. That is where he is really focusing his attention. And it really comes through in a lot of the content that he's building as he's speaking. Even if he's speaking about like an investment property, he'll also speak to that in terms of how it could help somebody who's thinking about moving up and saying, you're getting more equity in this property. So that then unlocks your ability to go buy something else down the road if you want to cash in some of that equity. So yeah, I think life stages is a good one. Another one where a lot of minds will go is the first-time home buyer segment of the population. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge population, and I don't think you'll ever run out of clients.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They do. But again, thinking through this, like the move-up buyer may need a little bit less coaching. They've bought and now maybe they're selling for the first time, so they need a little bit more coaching there. For the first-time home buyer, you should be very focused on the fact that like everything in the contract is like a foreign language. Where,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like what is a deposit? Or if we're in an area where we're using escrow, what is escrow? Like these words are not things that people use very frequently. We should become extremely good with our ability to communicate, ask questions, take a lot of meetings that aren't just showing properties. Like my process is typically we're going to do a buyer presentation. And if you decide you're going to work with me, and this is a first-time home buyer, but also anybody for that matter, we're going to go out and we're going to do what we call educational tours, which you're not going to go look at any properties in order order to write offers. It's just out of interest sake. And then we're going to sit down over Zoom and I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through a contract so that you understand all of the wording. And if you're doing first-time home buyers, you have to walk them through that. You can't just say, I'm going to be a first-time home buyer or realtor and not actually focus on them.
Yeah, I had a very similar process. And I think we're probably similar, obviously, given what we do for work, but we love the education point, right? Like we love coaching people, helping people, explaining things. Like I could talk all day about a contract and like what each little clause means and like what they should know or worry about for each clause. I love that piece. And I loved like preparing people so that they were ready for each step, because I'm very process oriented and you're the same way. So if you enjoy that, lean into that. If that kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies and you're like, oh, I can't like even think about walking someone through a contract in that much detail only all the time, then maybe it's not the niche for you.
Investors. Go to investors who see contracts all the time. Yeah. But I think, a really good place to leave it here is this concept. We're clearly both strong advocates for a niche. And I think that's the direction the world of real estate is going, is finding a niche, getting hyper specific, getting hyper local, but it should be somehow attached to a passion. We should think about the fact that it should also be something that can drive some revenue to us. But on top of that, we should be passionate about it. But I would also just encourage, if you don't have a niche right now, you don't have to decide on that in the next week. Go explore different property types. Go think through and make a list of what do you think the pros and cons of different niches are. And also, I would just say, don't be afraid to change them. Like if you jump into a niche and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that luxury was going to be like this, and you want to go to first-time home buyers, there's no harm in changing. You can do that. We always think, oh, the world's going to think of us as, somebody who changed from this segment of the market to that segment of the market, but nobody cares. Nobody even pays attention to us, really. So don't worry about changing a niche ultimately as well.
People remember how you make them feel, not everything that you say. So if you are able to make your niche feel like you're providing them value and that you're doing a good job for them, that's all they're going to care about at the end of the day.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Remember, you can reach out to us anytime at revrealestateschool.com, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
See you soon.
All right.